about his new book, The Anatomy of Liverpool, a history in 10 matches, which he's written with Scott Murray. Jonathan, you've essentially focused on specific episodes here to try to tell more about the whole history of the club. It is a subject that's been talked about quite a lot, but obviously you believe this format allows you to add to the narrative in an efficient manner.
Yeah, it's the same format as I used for a book I did on England 4 years ago. I think what it lets you do is it lets you see a little more the sort of day-to-day running of the club, the minutiae. When you read a sort of an overall history of Liverpool or of England or whatever, you sort of have this sense that the Shankly years with this endless procession of success, and you sort of lose a little bit of the day-to-day problem solving, the issues of players falling out with them or players being out of form or how training worked. And so by narrowing down the focus, I think you can bring things to light that haven't been previously brought to light in, as you say, a club that has a vast literature about it already.
The first match that you include here is, well, not an immediately obvious inclusion. It's Aston Villa 5, Liverpool 0 from 1899. Why is that one of the 10 most significant matches in the history of the club?
I think for a couple of reasons. We could have gone with Liverpool's first championship a couple of seasons later, but I think in some ways that game it's the start of this sort of resilience I think Liverpool have always shown as a club, that they went to Aston Villa on the final day of the season. If they'd won, they would have won the title.
And they lost 5-0, and this shows their resilience?
And they lost 5-0, they were final down after 30-odd minutes. Things could have fallen apart then. Tom Watson had just joined the club from Sunderland as manager. He was able to pick them up. And it took 2 years to sort of rebuild confidence and everything. It does show the resilience. It shows how they bounced back after that. But I think also in the history of a club, it's not just about success, it's also about failure. And when you read the newspaper reports from that time, obviously there's nobody left alive to talk about it, there's no video evidence of it, but you realise from reading those reports what a significant, I don't want to use the word trauma because it's too strong, but what a huge event that was for Liverpool fans, really at the very beginning of a club's history. No club has ever gone from birth to winning the title as quickly as Liverpool, and they almost did it 2 years quicker than they actually did.
Another thing that turns up in the newspaper reports at the time is the fact that Aston Villa's run just before they got to that Liverpool game was suspicious. They were beating teams 5, 6, 7 goals to nothing. And, a lot of people were looking at this, scratching their heads, thinking, these results are a bit strange, but they have given Aston Villa a goal average of .002 more than Liverpool going into this last game. And I think people kind of began to draw conclusions about that. You don't by any chance think that Liverpool being 5-0 down after 30 minutes might have been part of the same phenomenon? They did collude with Manchester United famously just before the First World War. There was a little bit of, maybe the Liverpool players lost the title but made a lot of money that day.
I don't think that's the case at all. If you're going to do that, why lose 5-0? Why not lose 1-0? Why not make it less humiliating? No, I think there's a strange thing is that the people at the time, certainly the reporter for Sporting Life, seemed to blame the weather. That it was very windy in the first half and Liverpool were playing into the wind. But it is interesting, this idea that I think there's 2 fixtures before that game, Villa won, I think 6-1 and 7-1, to just edge ahead of Liverpool in terms of goal average. So you gave them the opportunity of winning the title. But then I think winning 5-0, that just proved that actually was just a very, very good Villa side playing absolutely at the peak of their form. Don't forget they had been persistent winners of the title in the 1890s. Liverpool were very much the newbies there. They had no experience having won anything. So almost impossible to tell that this was moved. I don't think there's any suspicion of any wrongdoing on Liverpool's part. There was certainly suspicion of wrongdoing the 2 games before that people were raising eyebrows, but I think the 5-0 just sort of confirmed how good Villa were.
I'll apologise to those long-forgotten Liverpool players on Ken's behalf. So, Jonathan, just to look at the 1947 match included, it's a victory against Wolves, a 2-1 win. But what's particularly interesting about this is that we're still talking post-World War II. There's still rationing going on in in Great Britain, in the UK. Liverpool actually went over to the US for a pre-season tour, which you believe might have aided their league success that year.
Yeah, basically they got fattened up. They went to the US where there's no rationing. They ate a lot. Yeah, I'm not saying they ate excessively, but they ate far more and ate far more healthily than they would have been able to in the Britain of the time. And they came back and they were much stronger, much fitter than other teams as a result. And I think that title success is particularly significant because the war had created such a gulf between the old football and the new football. So you look at the teams that were successful before the Second World War, and you had Sunderland had won 6 titles, Villa had won 6 titles, Sheffield Wednesday had won 4, Liverpool had won 4. But Liverpool were the first of those pre-war giants to really get going again. And okay, they then fell into the second division. It took Shankly to pick them up. But that gave him something to build on. If they hadn't won that title, then Liverpool could easily have drifted away as Sunderland did or as Sheffield Wednesday did.
You talk at various points in the book about the economy of Liverpool, which has mainly been a story of decline since the war. I mean, Liverpool used to be a really important and very wealthy city, in the world, not just in England, as it were. Why is it that the sort of football success came as the city itself, in economic terms, was declining and didn't sort of accompany it?
Well, I think the football success initially came on the back of, maybe alongside, as part of the general cultural boom with the music in the city in the 50s and 60s. And I think the two things did feed off each other, this sort of sense of optimism of Liverpool as a place of importance and significance. And I guess when economic decline begins, there's a sort of, in the short term, you have a reaction against that. You have a sort of a defiance. And I think, particularly in the 70s, there was a sense of, and the 80s as well, there was a sense of Liverpool, the football club, standing against the decline, that was the one thing that kept going as unemployment rose and economic conditions worsened. But unfortunately, in the long term, you can't sustain that. And in the 90s, there's a whole host of reasons for Liverpool's decline in the 90s, but one of them, I think, is they didn't take advantage of the economic opportunities that were created by the Premier League. And perhaps they just weren't able to, because there wasn't the wealth in the city to raise ticket prices, to get all the sort of corporate deals that, for instance, Manchester United did.
After the weekend that we've just had with the FA Cup and so on, and all of these sort of half-empty stadiums and managers sending out weekend teams, I mean, it's interesting to read the account of 1965 when Liverpool beat Leeds 2-1 to win their first FA Cup. And the accounts of the reactions, it sounds almost as though this 1965 FA Cup win was about as big a deal as the Champions League win was 40 years later. Yeah,
I think that's probably a fair comparison. I mean, Shankly said, even after they won the league in '64, he said Liverpool cannot be considered a big club. They cannot be considered the giant of English football until they've won the FA Cup. And I guess the deferment of that success made it all the more vital that they did win it, and made it all the more moving when they finally did. This great outpouring of emotion that letters sent to Ron Yates, the captain, and one of them saying, I can die happy now because I've seen us win the FA Cup. So I think that, certainly for Shankly, that was a huge moment in terms of Liverpool's evolution.
I understand that you, along with Ken here, Jonathan, are one of the few people who really enjoyed Red or Dead, the book about Bill Shankly last year.
Really enjoyed, perhaps is not the way to put it, but I certainly admire the book. I kind of, and I think my experience of the book was not dissimilar to Ken's. That I found it a real struggle for sort of 200 or 300 pages, and then once I sort of almost gave up resisting and sort of let the rhythm of the book take over, I did come to enjoy it, and I think what David Peace did there very well. It was something I tried to do in my book on Clough, which I'm not particularly sure I succeeded either. That footballer's life is just one game after another, or a football manager's life is one game after another, and there's sort of almost a terror in the repetition that you win a game, well, you've got another game 3 days later, and it's just endless. And I think certainly that was one of the things that ground Clough down. Shankly, I think, almost seemed to revel in that, in the repetition. That the repetition sort of fitted the mechanics of how he worked, and certainly his way of working was very repetitious. So I think there is, the repetition is a part of football. The problem or the challenge then is, how do you represent that repetition without yourself becoming repetitous?
How did Bob Paisley deal with that whole process? Because, as you said at the very start, Jonathan, the part of the reason that you wrote this book in the way that you did, The Anatomy of Liverpool, is to sort of you don't just gloss over an era. And you mentioned Shankly, but the Bob Paisley era also looks like undiluted success. Even compared to Bill Shankly, he took over at a different time, took over a massively successful club. But the process of him actually taking it on it certainly looks now as though it was seamless. In researching this book, have you seen anything to suggest otherwise? Or are there any nuances that we don't know about with regards to how Bob Paisley did things?
I don't think particularly, no. I mean, I think Paisley, he didn't have a public persona of Shankly, but clearly was a genius, and I think possibly a greater genius than Shankly. I mean, one of the things that I came to wonder, and it's a dangerous thing to say, and I'm not convinced of this. I'm throwing it out there as a possibility. But would Liverpool have been even more successful if Paisley had taken over earlier? Did Shankly almost hold them back to an extent in the final years? And you think of how long it took for him to dismantle his first grade team to build the second one. Shankly, I'm talking about here. I suspect Paisley. Yeah, I think we have this image of Shankly as a sort of the tough guy from Scotland and doing a sort of Jimmy Cagney impersonations and everything. And actually, I think you get through the surface and he's a sentimentalist. He found it very, very hard to drop players, to break up teams. Paisley, I think, is the exact opposite. That you have this image of him as being a sort of cuddly old uncle in his cardigan and his slippers. And actually, he was really, really tough, really, really ruthless. I mean, Graham Souness said he ruled Anfield with a rod of iron. And I sort of, he's from County Durham, and which is where I'm from as well. I see a lot of Paisley, see a lot of my grandfather in Paisley. This sort of this acceptance that unpleasant things have to be done, so I might as well just do it. And the sort of lack of sentiment. And certainly he had no qualms at all about getting rid of players, or certainly no surface qualms. And he did the ruthless work. Now,
but maybe though he had to. I mean, when he arrived, maybe somebody like Bob Paisley would never have been invested with the kind of authority that ultimately he had if he hadn't previously been associated with this very successful. And I mean, you say sentimental, but a kind of an emotionally captivating regime of Bill Shankly. That if it had just been Bob Paisley, his cardigan and his pipe and so on, that I suppose you said if he'd taken over a bit earlier from Shankly as opposed to, right, but something like Paisley could not have succeeded without Shankly preceding him.
But I mean, I guess this is actually sort of a wider archetype of how revolutions work. You need the big charismatic figure to get the thing going, to form a new regime. But then he's not necessarily the best person to run that regime. That you need the people who just get on with it and get things done. So Shankly was absolutely necessary to start that ball rolling. Now it's also totally possible that Paisley, he learned from Shankly's error. That he learned that teams have to be broken up. That you need this process of constant renewal. A very similar thing happened to Leeds at a very similar time. If you look at the Leeds that Clough took over in '74, that was an aging team that went on to win the championship, but the decline after that was very, very rapid. So we didn't really have an English football. We didn't have these great dynasties before that Leeds and that Liverpool. Teams would be good for a couple of years and they'd fade away and they'd come back again 6-7 years later. I don't think there's this real sort of idea of succession planning or anything like that.
So, John, it's just that everything you've said over the last couple of minutes, I'm convinced that everyone listening has started to think the same thing, which is, how do you see the current Moyes, Ferguson, Manchester United dynastic succession fitting into this, possibly closer to the Clough at Leeds than Paisley at Liverpool?
Well, maybe. I mean, I'm not sure that there's ever been a situation quite like this. To have a manager there for 26 years. I mean, Shankly was only there at Liverpool for 15, and also that was a promotion from within with somebody who'd already, Paisley had already been taking training. He'd already had a huge tactical input. It wasn't somebody coming in from the outside. So, I think what's happening at United is a completely unprecedented situation, and it's not really a great surprise that people don't quite seem to know the best way to handle it. I mean, I'm puzzled by this idea that Ferguson's sitting in the stands somehow undermines. Well, sorry, I'm not puzzled by the notion that Ferguson's taking the stand undermines Moyes. I'm puzzled as to what the solution is, because it seems extraordinarily cruel to turn around to Ferguson and say, right, you've been really, really successful, now don't come back.
There is one man, Jonathan, who I think might be able to ask that question. The only person I can think of really is Bobby Charlton. You see him there the other night. I don't know, he might be the one person who is the right level of gravitas in the club, but also would have the ear of Alex Ferguson, who might be able to have a quiet word, because Moyes can't do it, and it might look a bit weird if any of the Glazers were to say it to him.
Yeah, I know, but I think that's just true, and I think Charlton is the only person with the seniority and the level of affection from United fans, the level of respect to be able to do that. Now, whether he wants to do that, I don't know. I mean, he obviously gets on well with Ferguson, but there's something very telling, I thought, in that little head shake that he gave to Ferguson after the game at the Stadium of Light. And it was almost as if the two of them were on one side, and Moyes was somehow letting them down. So, I mean, yes, he is the person who could have a word. Whether he would do so or not, I doubt.
Okay, the book is called The Anatomy of Liverpool, History in 10 Matches. Jonathan Wilson, brilliant stuff. Thank you.
Cheers, thanks.